Your game master can't possibly describe everything. And that simple fact is the key to unlocking an important and improved approach to playing role-playing games. Think about it. When your party walks into a bustling fantasy city, the GM might describe the main street, a castle in the distance, and the smell of the marketplace. But they don't necessarily describe every single cobblestone, every vendor's cart, or every face in the crowd. They can't. It's an impossible task. In fact, we already have a phrase for when they try and do this, the info dump. This creates gaps in the shared world, empty spaces that our brains will try to naturally fill in. Now, this too is a fruitful void. This is where the two typical conversations happening at most gaming tables will come into play and can be pretty critical. The first is the in-character or diegetic conversation, what your character says and what your character does. And the second is the out-of-character or non-diegetic conversation. This is the talk about the rules, the dice, and what do you do next, and how do we work together as a team. This bridges the gap between the two conversations, and it comes to metagaming. Now, I've already discussed metagaming and how typically this is all viewed as some form of cheating. But there's another side to it, and it's constructive metagaming. It is the informal, out-of-character coordination that keeps the game moving. It's the players agreeing to build a balanced party or decide to follow a GM's obvious so-called plot hooks because they know that's where the game is. This constructive conversation is not a bug. It's a fundamental feature of collaborative play. And it's a tool we use to help the GM do the impossible job and to function as a cohesive group. It's the game we play about the game to improve the game for everyone. So we use this constructive out-of-character talk to bridge these gaps and work as a team to fill in many of these gaps at different times. But how does a group ensure that the conversation stays healthy and collaborative? What is the invisible rule book that governs the game about the game? The unspoken rules of teamwork. The answer lies in something I've mentioned in other videos, metacommunication. And every role-playing group uses it whether they know it or not. Metacommunication is simply communicating about communication. It's the constant stream of verbal and non-verbal cues that frame how we interpret everything said and done at the table. This constant negotiation forges a table's unique, as everybody has come to call it, the social contract. This contract is the set of unwritten behaviors and rules, shared assumptions about how you all agree to play the game together. And constructive metagaming is how you fulfill that contract. Think about party creation. The informal chat where players decide to build a balanced party is a perfect example of constructive metagaming. It's a meta-level agreement to prioritize the group's success and improve their experiences. Another key benefit is integrating new players. When a new character joins a rigid in-group approach, might require, or could, days of suspicion and mistrust. But is that how anybody really plays the game? Nope. Instead, most groups use social metagaming to expedite the process, finding a quick reason to trust the newcomer. So, why do we do this? So everyone can get back to the game. It prioritizes the real people at the table over a strict simulation. Even following the plot, as it's called, is a collaborative act. Your cynical rogue might have no in-character reason to help the villagers, but you, the player, know that's where the game is. Having your character find a reason to care is you fulfilling that social contract to play the game with everyone. This is, in essence, being a good collaborator, using your out-of-character awareness to make the in-character experience better for everyone as a whole. The informal process is powerful, but what happens when games try to make it official? Written rules. These social agreements form the bedrock of good teamwork. But evolutions in modern game design have taken this idea a step further. So, how do games turn these informal conversations into actual mechanics, filling in all the blanks? They do it through co-creation. And it's the one solution to the GM's impossible job. Co-creation is a design approach that formally empowers everyone at the table to contribute creatively and thoughtfully. It takes the informal process of constructive metagaming and makes it an explicit part of the rules. This directly addresses the problem I initially mentioned. The GM can't describe everything. Co-creation empowers players to help fill in the blanks of the world, and this process occurs on a spectrum. At one end, you have what I would call GM-agreed co-creation. This is the most common and seamless type. It happens when a player makes a common sense statement about the world, and the GM just agrees because it's plausible and keeps the game moving. For example, a player might say, I tell my contract I'll meet them at the coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Main. Did the GM ever say there was a coffee shop there? Is there a 5th and Main? Likely no. However, the player just created it, and the GM accepts it, and the game just goes on. That's implicit, low-friction co-creation. It requires no negotiation. In the school of improv thought, this is part of what's called making an offer to find the game, and that whole yes and everybody runs off at the mouth about. On the other end of the spectrum is negotiated co-creation. This is when adding a detail to the world is an explicit rule-bound negotiation. A great brief example of this can be found in Fate Core. Players can spend a resource called a fate point to declare a story detail. You might be cornered in an alley and say, because my character is a scrappy survivor, there's a pile of discarded crates and trash here I can climb over the fence with. So you spend the fate point, this negotiation happens with the GM, and the fact becomes true. This is a formal, mechanically arbitrated act of co-creation. These tools turn players from passive observers into active builders of the world. These mechanics are used for adding details on the fly, sensible, implicit in-world details that should or could be there but were not explicitly mentioned by the GM. But some games have taken this philosophy to an even higher level. What does it look like when the entire game is built around co-creation from the ground floor up? The game is building the world. But some designers have built an entire philosophy around this idea. Now, what follows are not reviews of these products. They are simply here as examples of the execution. So let's talk about Ben Robbins and his company Lame Mage Productions. Ben Robbins is a designer and theorist who champions a core idea. The more a game asks of its players creatively, the more satisfying the experience can become. His games are GM-less, no prep systems designed for maximum player so-called authorship. They are perfect examples of co-creation as a central engine of play. His trilogy of scale shows the philosophy in action at different magnifications, if that's a clue. First, there's Microscope, the game of epic histories. In Microscope, there is no GM. Your role as a player is to act as an omniscient historian, creating a massive timeline from the outside in. You start by defining the beginning and the end of your history, the bookends. Then, players take turns adding periods, events, and scenes non-chronologically, jumping around the timeline to flesh out what interests them the most. It's one of the many collaborative tools for world building. Next is Kingdom, which zooms into the level of a single community. Players take on specific narrative roles, like power, which decides the community's actions, or perspective, which describes the consequences to guide a community facing a critical crossroads decision. And finally, there's Follow, which distills the formula down to a single fellowship on a quest. Perfect for one-shots. Now, other designers use similar principles. The Superhero RPG Spectaculars has a fantastic collaborative setting creation system where the group builds their city, its districts, key landmarks, and factions together before play even begins. At the beginning of many of its scenarios, referred to as issues, the players might be asked to fill in facts about the world, such as the various locations mentioned before. The player might need to add various supporting cast members like NPCs, so a reporter, a military general, or a scientist. This ensures every player is deeply invested in the world because they helped build it from the ground up. It also establishes a library of meta-knowledge that both the players and the characters know, without question. This design philosophy fundamentally changes our role at the table, moving us beyond just being role players. But what does it mean to truly embrace this new addition to our role as players? What's the difference between being a so-called co-author and co-creator? Creation, not just authorship. So what is the real difference between being a co-author and a co-creator? It's a subtle but powerful shift in mindset. And it's about making the world make sense. The role of a co-author is primarily concerned with the so-called story development. A player acting as co-author thinks about what would make for a more dramatic, interesting, or emotionally resonant narrative. They might have their character act on a tragic flaw at a key moment, not because it's the smartest move, but because it serves the character's arc. This is a valuable skill, especially in games that intentionally attempt to construct a so-called narrative. However, the role of co-creator is more fundamental. It's about building a better world that makes sense, that's great to play in. A co-creator uses their out-of-character knowledge and logic to fill in the plausible details of the world, making it feel more complete and a little more realistic. This isn't about telling a better story. It's about building a better sandbox to let stories emerge in. Remember the GM's impossible job? The co-creator's role is to help them. A co-creator provides sensible contributions. When they say, I'll go to the city's archives to research this, they are co-creating the fact that the city has archives. When they justify a piece of knowledge by saying, my character is a soldier, of course I'd know basic military formations. They are co-creating the standard knowledge base for soldiers in this world. This isn't about pushing a plot forward. It's about establishing a consistent, believable reality. Embracing this role can improve the game for everyone. Now, it takes pressure off the GM to be an omniscient world computer. It gives players more ownership and investment in the setting. And it grounds the fantastic elements of the game in a world that feels logical and lived in. The most powerful metagaming isn't about knowing monster stats. It's about using your own creativity and common sense to help build a world worth exploring, brick by plausible brick. So, embracing your role as a co-creator is a game-changing way to approach play. Do you have any favorite games that allow you to co-create in them? Let me know in the comments below. And if this was helpful, feel free to like, subscribe, or dislike at your own choice. Now get out there and create something.